27 years of marriage ended in 15 minutes at my lawyer's office. My husband, Greg, didn't even show up. He sent his attorney instead, a young man in an expensive suit who smiled too politely when he slid the papers across the desk. "All you need to do is sign here, Mrs. Cooper." Miss Cooper. The title already felt wrong. By the time my pen touched the paper, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The woman who used to host dinner parties, organize his calendar, remember every client's birthday she was gone. Greg had left me for his assistant, a woman half my age. I had ignored the warning signs for months, the new cologne, the late nights, the sudden gym membership. When I finally confronted him, he didn't even try to lie. He said he deserved to be happy, as if I had been the obstacle standing between him and joy. Our house was sold, our savings drained. Greg's name was on most of the accounts, so when he left, I had nothing but my old car, a few boxes of clothes, and my wedding ring. That ring had once meant forever. Now it felt like a shackle. I sat in my car outside the courthouse for almost an hour, gripping the steering wheel, watching snow fall on the windshield. 52 years old, and I was starting from zero. Friends disappeared quickly. People don't know what to say to a woman who's been left. They change the subject, they stop calling, they don't want to catch whatever failure you have. That night I opened my jewelry box, took out the ring, and stared at it under the light. 2 carats, vintage setting, his grandmother's. I thought of all the promises that had turned to dust. Then I slipped it into a small velvet pouch and whispered goodbye. The next morning I walked into a pawn shop and sold it for $800. With that, I bought a one-way train ticket to Denver. No plan, no destination, just the hope that maybe somewhere between here and there, I could find the pieces of myself again. The train station was nearly empty that night. A storm had rolled in from the mountains, turning the sky into a wall of white. I sat on a wooden bench, holding my ticket to Denver like it was the last piece of proof that I still had a direction. My entire life fit inside one suitcase and a purse. It was strange how light everything felt when your world had already collapsed. Across the waiting area, I noticed an elderly man sitting alone. His coat was too thin for the cold, his shoes wet from the snow. He rubbed his hands together, breathing into them for warmth. Something about him tugged at me. Maybe it was the quiet way he kept looking down, like he didn't want to be seen. I had exactly $11 left after buying my ticket. That money was supposed to last me until I found some sort of plan in Denver, maybe a job, maybe a miracle. But as I watched the man shiver, my conscience whispered louder than my fear. I walked over. "Sir, are you all right?" He startled a little before smiling faintly. "Oh, I'll be fine, just waiting for my train." "You look cold," I said softly. "Have you eaten anything?" He hesitated, embarrassed. "Not since this morning, but I'll manage." I reached into my purse and pulled out a $10 bill. It felt like everything I had left in the world. I offered it to him. "Please, there's a coffee shop across the street. Get something warm." His eyes widened, surprised. "Ma'am, I can't take that from you." "You can," I said. "You'd be helping me, really. I'd feel better knowing someone's warm tonight." He looked at me for a long moment, as if searching for words. Then he accepted the bill with trembling hands. "You have no idea what this means to me." When he walked away into the falling snow, I sat back on the bench and exhaled. I wasn't rich or strong or brave, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel useless. I felt human again. I thought I was saving him from hunger. I didn't know I was saving both of us. By the time my train reached Denver, the storm had turned fierce. The wind cut through my coat, and snow stung my face as I stepped off the platform. I had imagined this moment would feel like freedom, but it didn't. It felt like standing on the edge of the world, with no idea which way to go. I spent the first hour wandering the streets, dragging my suitcase behind me, pretending I had a plan. But the truth was, I didn't even have a place to sleep. When I finally asked for help at an information desk, the woman behind the counter gave me a sympathetic look and a printed map. "There's a women's shelter 8 blocks north," she said. "You might want to hurry, they stop intake at 9. 8 blocks in the snow felt like a marathon. My hands were numb, my shoes soaked, and the suitcase wheels clogged with ice. When I reached the building, yellow light spilled from its windows like a promise. The sign outside read, "Grace Haven Women's Shelter, all are welcome." Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and warm soup. A woman at the desk handed me a clipboard. "Name?" she asked. "Marilyn Cooper." She looked up briefly, her eyes kind. "First time?" I nodded. She handed me a pen. "Fill this out, we'll get you settled." The dormitory was a large room filled with metal cots lined in rows. Some women were sleeping, others whispering quietly. The woman next to my assigned bed smiled and offered a hand. "Joanne," she said. "Been here 2 weeks." Across from us, a young woman with curly hair waved. "I'm Cassie, you'll get used to it." That night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of 30 strangers breathing, crying, and trying to find peace. Somewhere in that chorus of brokenness, something inside me softened. These women weren't weak. They were survivors, every single one of them. In that shelter, surrounded by women who had lost homes, jobs, marriages, and dreams, I began to find something I hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. We were all starting over, all learning to live again. And for the first time since Greg left, I believed I might survive this too. 3 days later, I was sitting on my cot folding a borrowed blanket when a sudden buzz of voices filled the shelter hallway. The sound grew louder: footsteps, whispers, even a few gasps. Joanne poked her head through the dorm door and said, "Marilyn, you'd better come see this." I stepped into the lobby and froze. Parked outside the shelter, under the glow of the streetlight, was a black limousine. The kind you only see in movies. Its engine purred quietly while snowflakes melted against the glossy paint. Everyone was staring. A man in a dark suit entered the building. He looked out of place in his polished shoes and perfectly pressed coat. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. "Mrs. Cooper?" he asked politely. I hesitated. "Yes?" He gave a small nod. "My name is James Whitaker. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Thomas Whitaker. He asked me to bring you to him." The name hit me like a jolt. "Thomas Whitaker," I repeated slowly. "I don't think I know." "He said you met at a train station 3 nights ago," James interrupted gently. "He wanted to thank you in person." The entire room went quiet. Joanne's eyes were wide. "You mean the man you gave money to?" I nodded, still stunned. "You don't have to go if you don't want to," Cassie whispered beside me. "We can call the police, make sure it's safe." But something in James's expression, calm, respectful, told me I wasn't in danger. "If I go," I asked, "will you bring me back?" "Of course, ma'am," he said. "Mr. Whitaker only wants to speak with you." I gathered my coat, my purse, and followed him outside. The moment I stepped into that limousine, warmth surrounded me. Leather seats, soft lights, and the faint scent of cedar. I watched the shelter disappear in the rear window as the car pulled away. Just 3 days ago, I had given my last $10 to a stranger in the snow. Now, that stranger was summoning me in a limousine. I didn't know where we were going, but deep down, I knew my life was about to change again. The limousine glided through Denver's quiet streets, past tall buildings wrapped in light. I pressed my hands against the warm leather seat, trying to steady my nerves. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To Mr. Whitaker's residence," James replied with a small smile. "He's eager to see you." 20 minutes later, we turned through tall iron gates. The driveway curved between snow-covered trees before revealing a mansion so beautiful it took my breath away. The lights from its windows glowed golden against the night. When the car stopped, James opened the door for me. "He's waiting inside." The front door opened before we could knock. A man stood there, tall, silver-haired, wearing a soft gray sweater. It took me a second to recognize him. The same man from the train station, but so different now. His back was straight, his eyes bright, his entire presence radiating quiet strength. "Mrs. Cooper," he said warmly. "Thank you for coming. Please come in out of the cold." I stepped into a grand foyer with marble floors and a crystal chandelier. But it wasn't the wealth that struck me, it was the warmth. Family photographs lined the walls, and the faint scent of coffee lingered in the air. It felt like a home, not a museum. "I'm Thomas Whitaker," he said, extending his hand, "and I owe you a debt I can never repay." "Mr. Whitaker, you don't owe me anything," I said. "It was just $10. He smiled gently. "That $10 changed my life. Please sit down. Let me explain." We settled by the fireplace in a room filled with books. He stared into the flames for a long moment before speaking. "After my wife, Eleanor, passed away last year, I lost myself. We'd been married 43 years. She believed in kindness, in helping people who had nothing to offer in return. After she was gone, I began to think she was wrong, that kindness was dead." He paused, voice trembling. "So I tested it. I left my credit cards, my phone, everything that could identify me, and wandered the streets dressed as a nobody. I wanted to see if anyone still cared. I listened, stunned. For 3 weeks, he continued, no one spoke to me. No one looked at me. Until you. You sat beside me, asked if I was hungry, and gave me your last $10. That night, I was planning to end my life. But you changed my mind. The words hit me like a wave. Mr. Whitaker, I didn't. Yes, you did, he interrupted gently. You reminded me that Eleanor was right, that compassion still exists. You gave me back my faith in humanity and in myself. He looked at me, eyes glistening. Now I want to offer you something in return. I oversee a foundation my wife started, the Eleanor Trust. I need someone to help run it, someone who understands what it means to lose everything and still choose kindness. He took a deep breath. The position comes with a salary, housing, and purpose. If you want it, it's yours. For the first time in months, my heart felt light. I didn't know what to say, so I whispered, thank you. Thomas smiled. No, thank you. You saved my life, Marilyn. Let me help you rebuild yours. 6 months passed like a dream. Working at the Eleanor Trust became the purpose I never knew I needed. Every day I helped women who reminded me of the person I once was, frightened, uncertain, but still fighting to survive. The foundation provided shelter, food, job training, and most importantly, dignity. Thomas treated me not as an employee, but as a partner. His quiet wisdom and faith in me rebuilt something inside that Greg had destroyed, my belief in my own worth. One afternoon, as I was reviewing program reports in my office, James knocked on the door. Mrs. Cooper, he said carefully, there's someone here to see you. He says his name is Greg. My heart stopped. Greg Cooper? He nodded. Would you like me to send him away? I hesitated, then shook my head. No, I'll see him. When Greg walked in, I barely recognized him. His once dark hair was streaked with gray, and his expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. He looked smaller somehow, like the arrogance had finally been scraped away. Marilyn, he said, forcing a smile. You look good. Thank you, I replied, my tone calm. What brings you here? He sat down without being invited. I've been thinking about us, he began. About the mistakes I made. Mistakes, I repeated softly. You emptied our accounts, left me with nothing, and moved in with your assistant. Those weren't mistakes, Greg. Those were choices. He looked down. Amber and I were not together anymore. I'm sorry to hear that, I said flatly, though I felt nothing. I miss you, Marilyn, he continued. I miss what we had. You've built something amazing here. We could. Stop, I interrupted. You're not here because you miss me. You're here because your life is falling apart. His face tightened. You've become bitter. I smiled slightly. No, I've become free. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was the final goodbye we'd never had. He stood, gathered what was left of his pride, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he said, You know, the woman I married would have forgiven me. You're right, I said quietly. She would have, but she doesn't exist anymore. When the door closed behind him, I felt a strange peace settle over me. For years, Greg's opinion had been the measure of my worth. Now his absence was the proof that I no longer needed his approval to breathe. A full year passed before I heard from Greg again. By then my life had completely changed. The foundation had expanded its reach and I was overseeing new community programs that helped single mothers find jobs and permanent housing. I had an apartment above the office, small but warm, filled with things I had chosen myself. For the first time in decades, everything in my life belonged entirely to me. One morning, James walked into my office carrying a cream-colored envelope. This came for you, he said. No return address, but it looks personal. The handwriting on the front stopped me cold. I would have recognized it anywhere. Greg Cooper. I hesitated for a moment, then opened it carefully. Dear Marilyn, the letter began. I hope this finds you well and happy. I wanted you to know that I've spent the last year trying to repair the mess I made, not just financially, but emotionally. I entered a recovery program to deal with my gambling and anger issues. It hasn't been easy, but I'm learning. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes scanning each word slowly. He went on. I saw an article about you in the Denver Herald. It said you're now the director of a foundation that helps women rebuild their lives. I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you, even if I never said it when it mattered. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. I paused, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Not love, not even forgiveness, just a quiet closure. "I'm not asking for another chance," Greg wrote. "I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what you meant when you told me no. You didn't reject me. You taught me the hardest lesson of my life, that sometimes love means letting someone face the consequences of their own choices." At the end, he'd written, "Thank you, Marilyn, for not saving me when I wanted you to. It was the only way I learned to save myself." I folded the letter carefully and set it on my desk. For the first time in a long while, the past didn't hurt. It simply felt finished. Some goodbyes aren't about hate, they're about healing. The following spring, the Eleanor Trust hosted its first annual fundraising gala. I stood near the stage looking out over hundreds of guests dressed in elegant evening clothes. The crystal chandeliers reflected off champagne glasses, and soft jazz played in the background. A year ago, I had been sleeping in a shelter bed. Now I was standing in a ballroom filled with people who believed in the work I had helped build. Thomas joined me by the window, his tuxedo crisp, his smile kind. "You did all this," he said, gesturing toward the crowd. "Eleanor would have been so proud." I smiled. "You gave me the chance. I just tried not to waste it." He shook his head. "You turned a seed into a forest, Marilyn." Our foundation now included a job training center, a daycare program for working mothers, and a mentorship network that paired women who had rebuilt their lives with those just beginning to start over. Cassie, the young woman from the shelter, had completed her nursing degree and was now one of our mentors. Joanne volunteered at the resource desk every weekend. The circle had come full. As the evening wound down, Thomas reached into his jacket and handed me an envelope. "Before you go home," he said, "I'd like you to read this." Inside was an official offer letter. Chief Executive Officer, the Eleanor Trust, salary, $150,000 per year, with full autonomy to expand operations nationwide. I looked up, speechless. "Thomas, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied softly, "because no one understands this mission better than you." I felt tears sting my eyes. "I lost everything once," I whispered, "but I think I finally found myself." Thomas smiled. "Sometimes life has to break you open before it can rebuild you, right?" Later that night, as I walked alone through the quiet Denver streets, snow began to fall again. This time it didn't feel cold. It felt like grace. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you." Then, turning to the invisible audience beyond the night, I added, "If you're watching this, tell me, have you ever lost everything, only to find yourself? Share your story below. I'd love to hear how far hope can travel." When I got home that night, I set the CEO offer letter on my kitchen table beside a framed photo of the Eleanor Trust's first team: me, Thomas, Cassie, Joanne, and a dozen women who had turned pain into purpose. The lights of the city glimmered outside my window, and for a moment I just stood there, letting it all sink in. It had been less than 2 years since I'd stepped off that train with 73 cents in my pocket. Back then, I thought my life was over. I'd lost my husband, my home, and the version of myself who believed security came from someone else's promises. But that night at the station, when I handed an old man my last $10, everything began to change. That small act of kindness didn't just help Thomas, it rewrote my entire story. Because of it, I discovered a truth that no courtroom, no lawyer, and no betrayal could take from me. When you give from the heart, the universe has a way of giving back in ways you never expect. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regretted giving away that money. I smile and tell them it was the best investment I ever made. Not because of the wealth it led to, but because it showed me who I really was when everything else was gone. Now, when I visit the shelter where I once slept, I tell the women there, "You're not broken. You're becoming." And I mean it. I see in them what Thomas saw in me, the quiet strength that only loss can uncover. Before turning in for the night, I opened my journal and wrote, "Sometimes falling apart is just falling into place." Then I added one more line beneath it. "Kindness doesn't cost much, but it changes everything." As I closed the book, I thought of all the people watching my story somewhere out there, people who might be standing at their own train station moment, wondering if life could ever begin again. It can, trust me. If this story reached you tonight, leave a comment, tell me where you're listening from, and remember this, your $10, the little kindness you give away, might just be the miracle